My brother sent me 3 words on a Tuesday morning, and I read them standing in the parking lot of my office building, still holding my coffee. Stay out of it. 3 words after I had co-signed an $85,000 loan that kept his entire dream alive. That wasn't the part that undid me, though. The part that undid me was what I found 2 hours later, buried inside a document he never expected me to look at. And what I did with it at 11:47 that night changed everything for both of us. My name is Rachel, and I grew up in a family that had a very clear division of labor. My brother, who is 4 years older than me, was the dreamer. He had the ideas, the charisma, the way of walking into a room and making every person in it feel like they were the only one he came to see. My parents adored that about him. They called it his gift. I called it his insurance policy, because every single time one of his gifts landed him in trouble, someone else cleaned up the mess. That someone was always me. Growing up in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, I learned early that being dependable wasn't something my family celebrated. It was something they consumed. While my brother was being driven to guitar lessons he'd abandoned in 6 weeks and baseball camps he'd quit before the second session, I was the one reminding my mom about my own school forms because she forgot. I was the one setting my own alarm for standardized tests. I was the one who got a part-time job at 16 and paid for my own prom dress because, as my mother said, your brother has his showcase performance that weekend and tickets aren't cheap. He was charismatic. I was capable. Those 2 things were never treated as equal. By the time I was 30 and working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Denver, the pattern had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. My brother had moved to Portland 6 years earlier chasing a series of things: a band, a food truck, a life coaching certificate, a podcast that lasted 11 episodes. Each one had my parents' full emotional investment and a portion of their savings they could barely afford to give. None of them asked for mine, probably because they knew I'd point out the problems before they wired the money. Then he met his girlfriend. She was the one who gave him the idea for the restaurant. A small Italian place, she said, intimate, family recipes. The kind of neighborhood spot that fills up on weeknights because people feel something when they walk in. He called me on a Sunday, the most excited I had heard him in years, maybe ever. He had a location. He had the concept. He had her family's recipes. What he did not have was the money. My mother called the next day. She didn't ask how I was. She never started with that anymore. She went straight to his name, the way she always did, the way that told me the conversation wasn't about me at all. She said, "Your brother has finally found the thing, Rachel, the real thing." She said his girlfriend is wonderful, so grounded, so passionate. She said, "We've already put in what we can, and it's still not enough to get the loan approved." She paused and then delivered the line I had been hearing in different forms my entire life. "You've always been so good with money. You're the stable one. You understand how these things work." I did understand. That was the problem. A co-signer on a business loan is not a silent cheerleader. A co-signer is legally responsible. A co-signer's credit, income, and financial history become the backbone of the entire approval. If the borrower defaults, the co-signer doesn't get a courtesy call. They get the bill. I knew all of this. I explained all of this to my mother, carefully, on that Sunday call. She listened in the patient way she always listened to things that inconvenienced her, and when I finished, she said, "I know you'll think it through. You always do the right thing." 3 weeks later, I was sitting across a loan officer's desk in Portland, signing my name to an $85,000 agreement that made my brother's dream possible. He cried when it was approved. He hugged me in the parking lot of that bank and held on longer than he had since we were kids. He said, "I'll never forget this." He said, "You're my person." He said, "This is going to work and I'm going to make you proud." I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because I wanted it badly enough to decide that believing him was worth the risk. For the first 8 months, things were genuinely good. The restaurant opened in April. His girlfriend ran the front of house with a warmth that matched his energy perfectly. The menu was small and focused. Reviews were positive. I flew out twice that summer, and both times I sat at a corner table with a glass of Barolo and felt something I wasn't used to feeling in relation to my brother: pride without anxiety. I thought maybe we'd finally arrived somewhere new. Then, gradually, I started noticing things. Small things at first. He stopped answering my calls on the first ring the way he used to. Texts I sent about quarterly reviews of the financials, which we had agreed I would help oversee, started getting shorter replies. 1 week in September, he just didn't answer a message about the loan payment schedule at all. And when I followed up, he said his girlfriend was handling the books now and she had it under control. His girlfriend had a passion for hospitality. She did not have a background in finance. I mentioned this gently. He told me not to overthink it. Then the updates stopped altogether. The shared folder where we kept the business documents, the one I had set up myself, went quiet. No new files, no vendor agreements, no payroll summaries. When I emailed to ask, he said everything was being reorganized. He said he'd loop me in when things settled. He used the phrase loop me in, as though I were a distant investor and not the person whose financial history was currently collateral for his entire business. I let it sit for 2 weeks because I didn't want to be the difficult one. I had spent my entire life not being the difficult one, and the habit was deep. Then came the Tuesday. I had been trying to access the loan servicer's online portal, something I had done quarterly since the loan was opened. That morning, when I logged in, there was a new document in the correspondence folder, a modification request, filed 3 weeks earlier, requesting the addition of a second co-signer, his girlfriend, and the removal of my name from the co-signer position entirely. I sat very still in my car. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. I read the document again, slowly, the way you read something when your brain is trying to convince you that you misunderstood. I had not misunderstood. He had tried to remove me, quietly, without telling me. He had filed the paperwork, presumably hoping the servicer would process it and inform me after the fact, if at all. The request was still marked pending because, as I would later learn, removing a co-signer on an active business loan requires either a full refinance or the explicit written consent of the existing co-signer. He could not do it unilaterally. The servicer had flagged it and had been waiting on additional documentation. I set the coffee down on the dashboard. My hands were shaking slightly, not from anger yet, more from the specific shock of seeing something you suspected but never wanted to confirm laid out in clean black and white. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "I need to talk to you today." No dots. No reply for 40 minutes. Then, "Kind of slammed right now. What's it about?" I wrote back. The modification request on the loan. The 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then nothing for 22 minutes. Then his name lit up my screen. His voice when he answered was a register too casual, too flat. The tone of someone who had prepared a version of this conversation and was hoping to execute it cleanly. He said the business had grown in a direction where it made more sense for his girlfriend to be on the paperwork. He said it was a practical decision. He said I shouldn't take it personally. I asked him when he had planned to tell me. He said it wasn't a big deal. The servicer would have sent a notice. I said a notice, after the fact, of removing my name from a loan I took out to fund your restaurant. He exhaled. He said, "You're not involved in the day-to-day anyway, Rachel. You live in Denver. She's here every single day. This just makes things cleaner." I asked if cleaner was the word he meant. He said, "Look, I appreciate everything you did to get us started. I really do. But this is our business, mine and hers. And the way things are structured right now makes it feel like you have a stake in something you're not actually part of." I kept my voice completely level. I said, "So you tried to remove me from a legal obligation I entered in good faith, without telling me, because it felt cleaner to you." He said, "I knew you'd make this dramatic." I said, "Stay out of it." That was the text, "Stay out of it." Sent 20 minutes after we hung up, probably because he'd talked to her and they'd decided the call had gone worse than expected and distance was the better strategy now. 3 words delivered to a woman who had handed over her financial credibility so he could afford the imported pasta and the exposed brick walls his girlfriend had always imagined. I sat with it for the rest of the day. I went through my afternoon meetings on autopilot, answering questions with the surface layer of my attention while something deeper was doing the actual work. Going through the documents, recalling exact language, following the thread to its end. That evening, I opened my laptop at my kitchen table in Denver. The portal was still up. I went through every document in that account slowly and with the kind of focus I usually saved for quarterly audits. And what I found wasn't surprising, but it was clarifying in the particular way that only certainty can be. I was the primary co-signer, not a secondary. Not a joint party, Primary. His girlfriend's modification request, even if it had been approved, would have added her as an additional signer, but removing me required my written authorization. The servicer had already confirmed this in a follow-up letter to him that he had apparently ignored. More than that, as the primary co-signer with documented financial responsibility and no delinquencies on record, I had specific rights under the loan agreement that he had never bothered to read carefully. One of them was the right to request a full account review and payment schedule audit at any time. Another, buried in Section 14 of the original agreement, was the right to contact the servicer and flag concerns about the borrower's financial conduct if I had documented reason to believe the terms were at risk. I hadn't gone looking for a weapon, I had gone looking for clarity, but clarity has a way of handing you things. I didn't make any calls that night. I made a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and let myself feel everything I'd been compressing all day. There was grief in there. Actual grief. Not for the money. For the version of that parking lot moment after the loan approval when he held on and said, "I'll never forget this." That version of him had felt real. I wasn't sure now whether it had been real or whether it had simply been relief dressed up as love. I thought about my mother's voice on that first call, the stable one, the capable one, the one who understands. I had been handed that identity before I was old enough to choose it, and I had carried it so long it had started to feel like mine. I thought about the restaurant, the way it looked when I sat in that corner both times last summer, the warmth of it, the way he moved through the dining room on a busy Friday night like he had finally found the room he was always meant to be in. I thought about Section 14. The next morning, I called the loan servicer at 9 a.m. I identified myself as the primary co-signer, and I told the representative that I had reviewed the account and had concerns about transparency in the borrower's financial management. I told her that I had not been consulted on the modification request. I told her that I was formally withdrawing my support for the modification and requesting that it be closed. She confirmed she could process that immediately. Then I asked about my rights under Section 14. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let me connect you with our co-signer advisory department." What the advisor told me over the next 40 minutes is this. I could not unilaterally close the loan or force a default. I wouldn't have wanted to even if I could. What I could do was formally place a notification flag on the account indicating co-signer concern, which would require the servicer to contact the borrower and request a formal financial review and updated documentation before processing any future account changes. It was a procedural hold, not a punishment. It did not damage the business's credit. It did not trigger any penalties. What it did was make every future modification, refinance request, or account update impossible to process quietly. Without my explicit written authorization, nothing on that account was moving anywhere. I asked how long the flag could stay active. She said until the co-signer removes it or the loan is fully paid off. I thanked her, requested written confirmation, and ended the call. At 11:47 that night, with the written confirmation in my inbox and every related document saved in a folder I labeled simply Records, I sat at my kitchen table and understood something that had taken me 30 years to learn. The people who call you the stable one, the capable one, the one who understands they are not describing your character, they are describing your function, and a function can be withdrawn. His first call came at 8 the next morning. I watched his name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. The calls came in waves throughout the day. His, then my mother's, then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be his girlfriend's. I listened to none of the voicemails. I went to work. I ate lunch at my desk. I attended a 3 o'clock meeting and contributed 3 genuinely useful observations about a client's portfolio restructuring. I drove home in the October early dark and made dinner from what was in my refrigerator. At 7:15, the texts escalated. From him, "Rachel, pick up. This is serious." From my mother, "Sweetheart, please call me. Your brother is very upset." From his girlfriend, via a number I'd saved once for logistics. "I don't know what your problem is, but this is not the way adults handle things." I looked at that last one for a long moment. Then I set my phone face down. At 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived alone in a second-floor apartment in a building with a front entrance buzzer, so for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Then it rang again. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. My brother. He looked nothing like the version of himself I'd seen last summer moving through the dining room like someone who'd come home. His jacket was wrinkled. His jaw was tight. His eyes had the specific red rim of someone who had been making a lot of calls and not handling any of them well. He did not look like someone who had come to apologize. He looked like someone who had run out of other options and was here because I was the last door. I opened it. He stepped inside without being invited, the way he had done his entire life, and then seemed to register from my expression that this was not going to be the conversation he had scripted. He stopped in the middle of my entryway. He said, "Rachel, come on." I said, "Close the door." He closed it. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at me, and I could see him cycling through versions of this moment, trying to find the one where I was already softening. I didn't give him one. He said the servicer called. They told me about the flag. He said the word flag like it was something I had done to hurt him rather than a document I had filed to protect myself. I said, "I know." He said, "You need to remove it. We have a refinance application in progress, and they can't move forward until the cosigner releases the hold." I said, "I know that too." He exhaled and pushed a hand through his hair. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "I didn't do anything to you. I was trying to restructure the business in a way that made sense for us going forward. That's normal. That's what businesses do." I said, "You filed a modification request to remove my name from a loan I co-signed, without telling me, without asking me. After I handed over my financial credibility to make that loan possible, I said you sent me 3 words telling me to stay out of it." He said, "I knew you'd overreact." I said, "I'm not reacting at all. I said it very quietly, and I meant it. I was the still water under the entire conversation, and I think that unsettled him more than anger would have." He changed tactics. His voice shifted into the register I had known since childhood, the one that came out when charm stopped working and something softer was needed. He said, "Look, you're my sister. You know I love you. What we're doing at the restaurant, it's working. It's really working, and we need this refinance to expand into the space next door. If this flag is on the account, we lose the timeline and probably the lease." He said his girlfriend had poured everything into this. He said my mother would be devastated. I let him finish. Then I said, "I notice you haven't said you're sorry." He blinked. I said, "You came here to get the flag removed. That's why you're here. Not to explain, not to apologize. Not to tell me that trying to erase my name from a document that represents an enormous financial and legal commitment I made for you was wrong. You came here because the account is frozen and you need my signature." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "I think it's exactly fair." He sat down on my couch without being invited to sit. For a moment, he looked like he was going to argue, and then something in his face changed, some layer of it giving way, and what was underneath wasn't anger. It was something younger, tired. He said, "What do you want me to say, Rachel?" I said, "I want you to understand what you actually did, not what you're calling it, not restructuring, not a practical decision. You tried to remove me without my knowledge from a legal document I signed in good faith because you decided my function was complete." I said the words carefully and evenly. "You used the stable one. That's what this family has always done. I was useful when you needed the loan approved and inconvenient when you wanted the independence. So you tried to make me disappear on paper the same way you'd made me disappear everywhere else." The room was very quiet. He said, "I didn't think of it that way." I said, "I know. That's actually the part that I've had to sit with." He looked at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Still not quite apologetic, but less defended. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to leave the flag in place until you refinance the loan entirely under your own name and your girlfriend's. Take me off completely. Do it properly, through a full refinance, with a lender who approves you on your own merits. When that's done, and I receive written confirmation that my name is no longer on any active debt associated with the business, I'll cooperate with whatever the servicer needs from me to close my involvement." He stared at me. "That'll take months." I said, "Probably." He said, "We'll lose the lease on the expansion space." I said, "That's a consequence of the timeline you chose when you filed paperwork behind my back." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You'd really let that happen." I said, "I'm not letting anything happen. I'm declining to prevent the consequences of your choices. Those are different things." He stood. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. Not anger, not charm, not the younger version of himself that occasionally slipped through. Something more honest than any of those. He said, "I'm sorry, Rachel. He said it the way people say things when they finally run out of alternatives and discover that the truth was waiting there the whole time. "I'm sorry I tried to cut you out. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were only useful for what you could provide." I looked at him. I let it land without rushing to forgive it or dismiss it, because some things need to be said into a room that isn't already moving toward the next thing. I said, "Thank you for saying that." I said goodnight. He left. The door clicked behind him, and I stood in my hallway and breathed. Not the relief of winning something, not the hollow satisfaction of watching someone suffer, just breath. The specific exhale of a person who has stopped carrying something that was never hers to carry. My mother called the next morning. I answered, which surprised us both. She didn't yell. She was in the particular register she used when she wanted to seem measured, the one that was supposed to communicate that she was the adult in the room. She said, "Rachel, I think there's been a misunderstanding on both sides. She said your brother has worked so hard. She said his girlfriend is such a good influence. She said, couldn't I find a way to be supportive?" I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I said it like I meant it, and I did. I said I have spent my entire life being the one who handles things so that the rest of you don't have to feel any friction. I said I paid for my own prom dress because his showcase was more important. I said I co-signed a loan. I didn't have to co-sign because you said I was the stable one. I said stable isn't a personality. It's a role you assigned me because it was convenient, and I'm done performing it. She was quiet for longer than she usually was. Then she said very quietly, "I didn't know you felt that way." I said, "I know. That's also something I've had to sit with." I said, "I love you." I said that part, and I meant it without qualification. I said, "But I am not going to rescue this situation." I said he will refinance the loan on his own, and when that's done, I'll be free of it and we can all move forward from a more honest place. She didn't argue. She said, "Okay, just that. Okay." And it wasn't forgiveness or resolution or the beginning of a transformed relationship. It was just an okay, small and surprised, from a woman who had not expected to encounter a limit. In the weeks that followed, my world did something I hadn't anticipated. It got quieter, but in a way that felt like space rather than absence. My phone stopped being something I braced for. I started cooking again, actual meals with actual ingredients, the kind that require attention and a second glass of wine. I called a friend in Chicago I'd been too distracted to properly talk to in months. I started going to a Saturday morning yoga class I had signed up for a year earlier and attended exactly twice. I also started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Simone, and her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a window that looked out over the mountains on clear days. I had been in therapy before, briefly, after a bad breakup, but this felt different. This felt like choosing to understand something rather than just getting through it. For the first time in a therapeutic context, I wasn't talking about someone else. I was talking about the pattern, the way I had learned to disappear into usefulness. The way being needed had become so fused with being loved that I had stopped being able to tell them apart. Dr. Simone asked me once what I thought would have happened if I had said no. Not to the loan, but to any of it. To the prom dress, to the field trip forms, to any single moment where I was handed someone else's emergency and implicitly told to carry it. I thought about it for a while. Then I said I think they would have figured it out. I think the world would have kept moving. And I think I would have grown up knowing that my presence was wanted, not just my function. She said that's a really significant thing to understand. I said it only took 30 years. 3 months later, on a Thursday afternoon, I received an email from the loan servicer with an attached document. My name had been fully removed from the account. The refinance had been completed. The business was now operating under a new loan in my brother's name alone. I read it twice. Then I opened the flag removal portal, entered my information, and submitted the authorization. The confirmation came back in under a minute. Account closed. Co-signer relationship terminated. My credit file would be updated within 30 days. I sat back in my chair and looked out my office window. It was November. The mountains had their first snow on the peaks. He texted me that evening. Not a long message. Just, "The servicer confirmed. Thank you for doing things right, even when I didn't. I know I don't deserve that." He paused, or at least it felt like a pause between messages, and then, "I hope we can start over, properly, when you're ready." I didn't respond right away. I let it sit for 2 days, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. because I needed to know what ready meant before I agreed to anything. Ready didn't mean forgetting. Ready didn't mean pretending the parking lot moment was all that had ever happened between us. Ready meant choosing, with full information, to try again. It meant knowing I could say no at any point, and the relationship would have to survive that without falling apart. When I did write back, I said I appreciate you saying that. I said let's take it slow. I said I'd like to come visit the restaurant again sometime, when it feels right. He replied with one word: please. What I know now that I didn't know at the beginning of all of this is that being the capable one, the reliable one, the one everyone trusts to hold things together, that can be a real quality. It can be genuinely yours. But there is a version of it that isn't a quality at all. It's a contract you were enrolled in without being asked, and the terms only benefit one side. Learning to tell the difference between those two things is some of the most important work a person can do. I didn't blow up my family. I didn't cut anyone off forever. I didn't want revenge for its own sake. What I wanted was what I should have had all along: the right to decide what I signed, what I carried, and what I put down. The right to have my presence mean something beyond my usefulness. Boundaries are not walls. They're not punishments. They are the honest answer to the question of what you're actually available for, as opposed to what someone has simply assumed you'd provide. And giving an honest answer, even late, even after years of the other thing, is never too late to mean something. If you've spent your life being the capable one in a family that never asked how that felt, I want you to tell me about it in the comments below. And if this story found you at the right time, please subscribe, because there are more of them coming.